Thank you. Good afternoon, friends. We are back after a morning of really good talks for an important and exciting panel discussion on historical resurveys. I'm happy to introduce. Friends. We are back after a morning of really. I'm happy to introduce an esteemed panel of serious and seriously cool birders and bird researchers and naturalists with a fair amount of writing between them. They are experienced in the dynamics of complex research projects. Our first panelist is Priya. She's a wildlife biologist by training, with her research focusing on carnivore ecology and conservation in northeastern India. She's currently associated with Felis Creations, Bangalore, as a researcher coordinating a multi-institutional and multi-taxa documentation project in the Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh. She contributes actively to citizen science initiatives and watches moths as a hobby. Our next panelist is Umesh Srinivasan, who is based in the Center for Ecological Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He studies the joint impacts of climate change and forest degradation on the behavior and population dynamics of eastern Himalayan birds. Our third panelist is Dr. Dhananjai Mohan. He's a graduate from IIT Kanpur. He soon joined the IFS, initially in the Uttar Pradesh cadre, and then in 2000, the Uttarakhand cadre, luckily for us in Uttarakhand. He was awarded a PhD degree on habitat selection of birds in New Forest, Dehradun, by the Forest Research Institute in Dehradun. He has served in various capacities in the forest headquarters before taking a position of the Director of Wildlife Institute from January 2020 to April 2022. Currently, he is PCCF, Uttarakhand, looking after research, training, and management. His primary interest is avifauna, and he's written a book, contributed book chapters, and has many publications on the subject. He's a passionate bird watcher and a naturalist of nearly 4 decades, and has spanned the length and breadth of the country in pursuit of birds. Our final panelist and moderator for the session is Dr. Ghazala Shahabuddin. She has a PhD in ecology and conservation biology from Duke, and has worked on birds in a range of landscapes, including the Western Ghats, Northern Aravallis, and the Western Himalayas. She's been researching the effects of land use, biomass extraction, fragmentation on birds of Himalayan hardwood forests, in addition to assisting with long-term bird monitoring. She's also published extensively. She's also involved in promoting rural participation and benefit sharing in nature-linked tourism through training and awareness programs. She is currently visiting professor at Ashoka University and a senior adjunct fellow at A3 Bangalore. Before I hand over to Ghazala, just some process information. After this brief round of introductions, the session will get underway. Towards the end of the panel discussion, there will be time for Q&A. So dear friends, all of our friends in the audience, speakers get energy from the queries you post to them. So I request you to be please vocal, and or its equivalent on Discord. Please post your questions there, and at the end, we'll have an interesting Q&A. With that, I'm going to hand over to Ghazala. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Bird Monitoring India, all of the staff helping out, all of the volunteers. It's been a wonderful morning of amazing talks. And I think the exchange across the, the continents is really, really enriching. We've had a series of really good talks, from talking about birds in Amazonian rainforest to eastern deciduous forests of the United States, to pelagic birds, and even Antarctica. I mean, places that, you don't hear about. So it's been really, really valuable. And I'm very happy to have these panelists with whom we can discuss and share knowledge about historical resurveys and their value. So I want to start off this panel discussion by going to the panelists and asking them to share their views overall on the value, the ecological value and the management value of these surveys that are happening, resurveys that are happening, based on both of their, their personal experiences. All of the panelists have experience with resurveys and large-scale surveys, for that matter, monitoring and so on. I'd like them to reflect on their experience, as well as some of the talks that have happened today. And let us, give us your perspective on the value of this whole process of resurvey. Can I start with you, Dhananjai, please?
Thank you, Ghazala. I think there can be no second thoughts on the value of resurveys. The challenge, of course, is how far back in history we can go. Because we started actually quantifying bird information rather recently. I would say approximately 2 decades. There aren't very many places. Of course, there may be some PhD work here and there prior to that also. But over the last 2 decades, yes, there has been quite a lot of quantification. Of course, I chanced upon a paper in BNHS in 1948. It was titled "A Bird Count in New Forest." I want to do that resurvey. I haven't done that as of now, but that will probably go as one of the oldest counts. It was done just by sweeping an area, a fairly large area, by a group of people. So we have to actually dig into past literature also for some similar literature, because the larger the time gap, I think more valuable that resurvey becomes. And of course, recently, a lot of quantified information has been coming out of a lot of studies, and many of them may be now 15, 20 years also ripe for a resurvey. I think last 20 years have been very important when it comes to changes in our habitats and forests and everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Priya?
Yeah, so I echo Dhananjai sir's thoughts on this. Some of the talks today actually were very interesting because I realized that this kind of work is being done quite a bit in the New World, but not so much in India. So the reason I'm here today actually is because I'm part of this survey, which is a multi-taxa survey. And this survey it's a resurvey with the original survey that was done in 1911-12. So I think there are very few studies of that kind that have ever happened in this country, or, even if they've happened, they haven't been documented well. So, but this is a rare kind of a survey because this expedition was very well documented. It was in the Siang, present-day Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh, which is an area, which is a birding hotspot now, but much of this stuff happened much of this birding happened in the last maybe 1 decade or a decade and a half. And we are going back in time by 110 years here. And so in this particular, original survey, this team of British explorers went in. It was actually a punitive expedition, but there were surveyors and zoologists who were part of this team. And they went in and they collected specimens from the entire Siang Valley, actually not the entire valley, but maybe half of the valley. And these specimens were then meticulously documented, and there were about 111 species that they got. So we were kind of, we have been trying to sort of rewalk the same path and see how many of these species that we get, would we get here. And one interesting aspect of this survey is that unlike some of the studies that we came across earlier today, which are in forested landscapes which are undergoing little change. This is a large area. So we're talking about a large spatial scale and a heterogeneous landscape, which is undergoing rapid changes just as we speak. So which makes kind of, very sort of focused ecological studies here a bit difficult because a lot of variables come into play here. Having said that, I am very impressed with the fact that, there are teams from India which are working in Antarctica doing, resurveys, and, the Salim Ali resurvey in Karnataka. Or Mysore state. These are very interesting surveys. And yes, I think the value of these surveys cannot be undermined. And I think we need more of, similar studies, which requires us to also sort of integrate with historians.
Thank you, Priya. Umesh?
Again, there's really no doubt that these historical resurveys are important. I think they're particularly important and informative when you have large gradients along which you expect to see change, like Ben Freeman's resampling of John Turbog's, Ben Freeman's resampling of the Andes, where you expect to see upslope range shifts because of climate change. And it's not as if the ranges are shifting on an annual basis, but you do your historical survey in 1960, come back 40 years later, and you actually see those ranges having shifted upwards. So I think that particularly informative in these sorts of cases where you have clear expectations of ranges shifting or something happening along gradients. Um, I was very surprised that Ari Martinez and his colleagues did not see so much change happening in the Peruvian Amazon with bird communities. Um, Unlike other places like Panama and Djibouti, where people have actually seen bird communities changing with their historical resurveys. Now, I'm not sure why that is, but the discrepancies between these might be because bird populations are dynamic. We know these that bird populations fluctuate over time, and you're then getting a snapshot at a historical time point, and then getting another snapshot at a future time point. And we don't really know where we are on the population fluctuation dynamics of these different populations. And so we might actually see communities having changed simply because of population dynamics and population fluctuations, but not necessarily because of any directional change in the community. And so those discrepancies could arise from these sorts of factors. And in those cases, I think more continuous monitoring might be more informative, because then you'd actually pick up trends and directions in the ways in which bird communities are responding.
Umesh, that's really interesting you raised that. So I watched 3 talks today, and so the talk on eastern deciduous forests in the United States, and Ari Martinez talk on rainforest birds in Amazon, they had very similar results. They were both located in protected areas where the samples were taken in the midst of really large, continuous, relatively pristine forest where no logging has happened for a while. So do you think that the findings that they had could be related to just the fact that they are working in a system which is kind of more stable and has less anthropogenic interventions than other places, and the fact that in Manu, particularly in the South American example, they've used a range of techniques. It's not just one kind of count, but a number of different methods that kind of reinforce the finding. In the eastern United States too, they've found quite a stable, in a large proportion of birds showing very stable populations over time. So it is very intriguing and worth looking into. But definitely, in answer to my own question, I think that there's some very fascinating insights coming out. And I think my next question or for discussion is, what you all have been already talking about, the kind of methods that are used, the kind of situations in which these historical resurveys can be more or less useful. I'd just like to quickly mention about Subbu Subramania's work in Mysore State. And I thought it was really, really interesting how he was able to follow the routes and the meticulous way in which he tracked down, the routes and the districts in which Salim Ali had been in 1939-40. But it also set me thinking about, the value of particular value for quantification of birds. Of course, it wasn't possible, and people had different reasons for doing the resurveys, right? So Salim Ali did not definitely look at counting birds at that point in time, but it would be useful to discuss some of these methodological approaches. So Dhananjai, would you like to comment on any particular aspect of methodology that you'd like to point out that would be useful for some of our audience who might be starting out or thinking of doing any resurveys? You're muted, Dhananjay.
It'll actually depend on so many things. I mean, ideally, we should have as robust a methodology as possible, where the quantification is of very high degrees. Point counts and spot mapping, and now, of course, all this about the bird recordings, the audio part. But that is where I think much more input in the form of human resource, a specialized human resource is required. A large number of people who could actually contribute to monitoring would not probably go into these things. And for them, something like a simple encounter rate would also be quite helpful. And in fact, eBird kind of gives you that. Although there, much of the data that is coming in, the focus is to get as many species as possible in most of the checklists. So if the same thing can be tweaked by some people who are interested in monitoring, so that they follow a similar protocol year after year. I mean, we initiated something like this in Mussoorie Sanctuary. We have 4 trails, about 4 to 8 kilometers, and we are since 2015 we have been walking them at the same time. So we need at least 4 good birders, and fortunately Dehradun usually can provide that. But definitely there is a lot of push required to sustain these efforts. But being a long trail, and normally reasonably long trail, I think we can get reasonably good data. In fact, I could do that trail once in 2005 and could compare also. But it's just one-time effort. There can't be too much of statistics coming in those comparisons, but at least there is something. But at the same time, we have a lot of PhD works. You will have transect data. You will have so comparisons can be far more robust, and spot mapping, like in our project with the University of Chicago, we have 32 plots of 5 hectare each across the Himalayas, from altitudes ranging from 400 meters to 4,000 meters. So these plots can be resurveyed. Now they are almost 15 years old surveys. So, and in fact, me and Trevor have a plan of doing that. I'm waiting for my retirement actually desperately to do this, because it's difficult to find time otherwise. But anyway, it's not too far, just 2 years. So we hope to resurvey these and get some interesting information. So I think that's a problem. Going back in too much in history, we don't get any quantified information. But yes, even what like Priya is going to attempt, that will have also a great value. It will just be a list comparison of 2 lists actually. Presence absence, that's all. So everything has a value. I mean, I think what is important is that we get going in this. Mm-hmm. That is, I think, the foremost thing.
Thanks. Looks like you're eager to retire, and so are we, very eager for you to retire. And it's very interesting to know about all the plots across the Himalayas, and if you can get to them with your team, it will be fantastic. Priya, would you like to comment on methods and how to improve them?
Yeah, so this is actually a complex topic, because eventually what methods you use will depend on what kind of birds you're targeting. What are your ecological questions, or do you just want to sort of walk the area and see if the same species are still found in that landscape? And that's the last one, is essentially what we are doing. We are banking heavily on eBird. So yes, thank you eBird for that, because we see a lot of advantage in eBird. And one of the massive advantages there is you're making your data available in real time to everybody else. And you're allowing others to vet your checklist for accuracy. So, in case there's any doubtful record, that somebody is going to look at it and be able to point it out, and you can sort of confirm whether that species is found there. Next time you can be more aware that this is a rarity or something. Having said that, I mean, I'm going to leave the methodology part to maybe Umesh, because he specializes in it and he's been doing this for a long time in the same landscape. So yeah. Umesh, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, Umesh.
Thanks, Priya.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's amazing we have Umesh here, because he's been doing this hands-on for a while, and he knows exactly where the crunch starts and the problems lie. So please go ahead, Umesh.
No, I completely agree with Dhananjai sir. When it comes to manpower, right? The most important thing we need for resurveys or for surveys is skilled people who can identify birds by sight and sound. And that's often something that the government is unwilling to fund, or it's underappreciated, especially for hyper-diverse communities like the Himalayas, how important skilled people are in being able to identify birds. So that's a huge rate limiting step in all of this. When it comes to methods, I think it's definitely a non-trivial problem. And the farther back you go in time, the more difficult it might be to replicate the methods that have been used by people in the past. For instance, you have people like Salim Ali and Humayun Abdul who would go out and collect specimens, right? So the sampling of those communities would be with shotguns, right? We obviously cannot do that anymore. So the I think the most value lies in the historical resurvey if the methods align very well, and so the comparisons actually can be made in a more robust manner. That, of course, that's not often possible. And like in the Siam case, for instance, it was a punitive expedition. It was the British going and trying to punish the Adi tribes, but they had surveyors with them. Uh, and the landscape has also changed, so that's another challenge. Uh, but what's fascinating to me is efforts like John Turbog's 97-hectare plot in Manu, which had well documented protocols and the data was well curated and available for a resurvey, and people could actually go back to that exact same plot and redo that work. And I think for us in India, where we're just sort of starting off that kind of work, it's very important that we make sure that we have our protocols very clear, such that somebody who wants to do this 50 years down the line can actually identify the sites that have been surveyed in the past and reuse the same exact methodologies to be able to compare communities between time points.
Yeah, excellent points, Umesh. I think your point about human resource is also very important, yours and Dhananjai sir's. We find people in the landscape who are really good, and Ram and I have been kind of training a few people, and we find that they're worth their weight in gold, really. They've learned these bird ID to the dot, and they're reliable. So we need to encourage such people and use them in our research as much as possible, right? And I think your point about very careful documentation, I just want to reiterate that, because everything really depends on how well you document the sites, how well you store the data, how you make it accessible to people. So for young people who are trying to establish baselines now, I think this is going to be really key. So be very careful. My advice is to, really spend a lot of time in documentation, and not just using GPS, readings, but also nice sketch maps of how you would get to those sites, where the village road is, where the river is. It just helps you orient yourself, because tomorrow, if there's a big dam coming up in the area, you may not even find those GPS points anymore. So very useful to have maps and points together. Okay, and I just want to reflect back on some of the talks today. I think the amount of data is really critical. You need lots and lots of data to make quantitative conclusions. So you really need to see how variable your data is, and make sure that you're getting enough data to cover all those fluctuations through time and through space. So need lots and lots of data. And for the historical walk surveys, which are qualitative, I think the value there is just being able to visit those sites again, and even to see how the landscape has changed or not changed. So it's very important. And of course, the abundance or rarity of birds could be an important indicator there. Encounter rates could be important. But just finding rare species about which very little is known would in itself be a very important aim in that case. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on methods? Because I think everyone's rearing to talk about the challenges. Everyone looks very anxious and about this whole thing. And I know that everyone's faced a lot of challenges in setting up these programs. I myself am working on something like this, and it's been incredibly difficult. The fact that these are really simple methods, more or less. And just before the panel discussion, I was telling my co-panelists that when you listen to talks like Ari Martinez and other talks from United States, everything seems so simple and straightforward, and the analysis is easy, and they got at least one person who was in common with the previous survey, so they were able to draw some robust conclusions. There was no problem of permits and so on. But here in India, we seem to be struggling with the logistical challenges. So could the panelists talk a little bit about the logistical challenges? Dhananjai?
This is really a challenging point. And I've also faced difficulties in sustaining such initiatives. I wouldn't say that they were very robust, but way back, I recollect in 2004, we started Yamuna Valley bird count with the, this is talking about Yamuna catchment. So a fairly large area, and identified eight locations and trails of about 5 to 10 kilometers, 2 trails at each location. And we could do 2 summer and 2 winter counts there. And of course, required a lot of support from bird watchers, because at least 8 bird watchers for 8 locations. So, but we managed that, but it was so difficult to sustain. There was no institutional mechanism, or the forest department only organized it. But there also, the set of people who are there, sometimes you get the right set who support, sometimes you don't. So very difficult to sustain such programs. But I'm happy that at least we have got something which is, again, something that can be used for a resurvey. So it doesn't get into any institutional framework, unfortunately. It's often always pushed by individuals, and how long they can push, that is, I know how difficult it is to sustain the Masuri bird count this just about 8 years old, of course, with a gap of 2 years during COVID. So even doing that is quite a challenge, getting people, getting to the right time at the right place. So all those things are very challenging. We don't have any institutional program of any kind when it comes to bird monitoring. And unfortunately, there are hardly any academic institutions who can sustain these things. In fact, I get reminded of the 50-hectare Modumulai plot, which is now some 3 to 4 decades old, Umesh, and but probably doesn't have much on bird monitoring, which could be actually added to it, because if it has been, we need some institutional support to carry on these things, and there are ISCs providing that institutional support. So that is how we can probably think of some long-term monitoring programs. Otherwise, it's really challenging, Yeah.
Priya?
Yeah, so I think other than institutional support, I think, challenges are very fresh in my memory, because we are right now going through this. And so I would say, yes, if you're doing a snapshot survey, it's still easier to sustain it than like a time series. But at the same time, challenges come in different ways. So it's also about, integrating with local people, because, it's very different if you're working in a protected area or a, homogeneous landscape like that. But if you're working in a landscape where you have to, interact with people, it goes both ways. You have to protect, or you have to be sure that the research personnel are safe, and you have to be sure that, nobody's offended in that landscape where you're working. So that's very important. Finding people who would be willing to work in these landscapes is very important. Umesh, I'm sure is familiar with this. Our window of weather is so short in Arunachal. So you want to maximize everything at that point when you have dry season or relatively dry season, because even bird activity goes down so much post-rain or during rain that, then there's no point sampling and spending that precious money. So you have all these, and then of course, there are logistic issues, locating places. So we have names of places from 100 years ago, 110 years ago. Now the lower parts of this valley is kind of a multi-ethnic, kind of a setup, which means maybe, the British team got a name of a village from one community. Maybe they got a name from the Mission community, but the Adis make all the same place something else. So, you have to go around figuring out exactly where that place is located. And then part of the survey, for instance, was in the Brahmaputra floodplain. So some of those islands have been washed off and, they don't even exist there anymore. So So kind of, that makes walking the exact trail also very challenging, because, and then sometimes not sometimes, very often places that are mentioned in this report are now small towns, or they're more urbanized than before. So you may not get anything there. So you would have to go out of that area, or at least into the peripheries of that area. But then there's cultural hunting, in this area. So if you're very close to a village, you will actually get nothing. So I don't know how true you're being to, the idea of a resurvey if you're going, let's say, 20 kilometers out of the village and surveying there. Now, would reviewers or, would others from the scientific community accept this as, a true resurvey? So these challenges kind of, we've been facing them right now. And yeah, like also, the landscapes that were surveyed at that point may have been, they may have been across multiple sort of administrative units. So like now parts of this landscape are in Assam and one part is in Arunachal, which means if you actually want to walk this entire trail, you have to get permits from Assam and Arunachal and multiple forest divisions on the way, because this is anyway a linear structure. So yeah, I would say there are a lot of challenges involved. And while you're navigating those challenges, sometimes, your methodology may not really work you can't really have a rigid methodology, unfortunately.
Thanks, Priya. Yeah, Umesh?
I'm not about resurveys, but I can talk about some of the experiences that I've had doing a population dynamics, a bird ringing project that is an annual sample in the breeding season, and this would be our 13th year of doing that. But it has been, I would say the challenges are of two types. One is simply logistics, and in those logistic problems are, one, most importantly, I feel manpower, because you have to have people who are trained to go extract a bird from a net, put a ring on it without harming the individual, and being able to do that on a consistent, regular basis. And so we've been lucky so far that there's not been too much turnover in our field staff. But if there is that turnover in field staff, then we have to, really put in a lot of effort for training fresh recruits to do this kind of very specialized work. The second thing is funding, and this is allied to the manpower issue a little bit as well. Funding cycles are usually 3 years, 2 years or 3 years, and they're targeted towards standalone projects. And funding agencies would like to see you collect primary data and make something out of that 2 or 3 year project, rather than support something that is long term and say, write to a funding agency and say, look, I need 6 highly trained field assistants, and I'm going to continue work that was started in 2011. You're much less likely to, the funding agency is probably going to say, buy 3 laptops and we'll give you funding for 3 field assistants. And it's also more likely to say, we're not really looking for extending existing projects, but we're looking for fresh standalone work that we can put our name on as well. So I think the funding cycles and the prioritization for long-term monitoring needs to be there, and it needs to have institutional support, like Dhananjai sir was saying, through IAC, the Muthumalai plot, and now IAC with the long-term monitoring of birds in Arunachal Pradesh as well. The third logistical hurdle or challenge is, again, like Dhananjai sir was saying, it's so personality and individual driven in the forest department. And these are information, this is information that we're collecting that is potentially of great value to forest managers, and also acts as an early warning system, telling forest managers, hey, look, these are the kinds of birds that are at threat, these are the kinds of things that we can do to enhance survival of these species and so on. But it remains a challenge to get permission to do this kind of work. And because of this work is so seasonal, 3 months or a 2-month delay in getting your permit means you've lost an entire year of sampling that project, that community at the right time. So those are the logistical challenges. There's one more challenge, which is the challenge of inference when it comes to this kind of work. Because what what we're doing is when we're comparing land use change, for example, and communities on different land uses, we're using space for time substitutions. We're not doing before after comparisons. We're not saying here is a forest, this is what the bird community looks like. Then it gets selectively logged, and then I see how the community changes. Instead, what we're doing is we're saying here is logging that happened, 15 years back. I want to see how the bird community has changed in this log forest patch. So I find another primary forest patch, close by as my baseline for comparison. But the baseline in the primary forest patch has also shifted because of, let's say, climate change, right? So you've got the primary forest baseline also having shifted, and you don't know how much that baseline has shifted because you don't have that historical data. And so when you're making comparisons with space for time substitutions, the actual comparison would probably be what is the bird community log forest today compared to the historical bird community in primary forest, rather than the comparison between modern primary and modern log. And there's very important, interesting work on this, the shifted baselines issue by Phil Stouffer and his group that was published a couple of years ago in Ecology Letters. It's a very
Thanks, Umesh. Yes, Dhananjai.
I just wanted to chip in one thing that if we are planning to start new monitoring programs, then it's very important to include, areas which are not like primary and good forests. It's very important to include even urban areas because that's where the change is happening too fast. And there are birds there as well in India. Everywhere there are birds, so they are also getting affected. So it's very important. Many a times we have a tendency to go deeper into great forests to set up monitoring protocols. So that's something I was telling you about 2004 Yamuna Valley count. I remember there was a trail from Mussoorie Library Point on the main road down, coming to 4 kilometers down towards Bhatta on the Dehradun Mussoorie highway. And I'm sure if we redo it, there'll be massive kind of changes that we can see. So this is where I think we need to also keep that in the back of our minds when we plan new monitoring protocols.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Since we have a Forest Service person in captive on this panel discussion, could you say something about the permit situation? Why is it that even so many years later, it's still difficult and time consuming to get permits? Can it be made, can it be automated in some way, or can some kind of single window application system be set up at the state level?
See, the permits, there are two categories, one in the protected areas and one outside protected areas. In fact, the protected area ones are a little more tricky, but outside protected areas, it is rather straightforward. Right now, I deal with the permits outside protected areas, and maybe maximum of a couple of weeks, and that's too because of a little bit of red tape and paper. But protected areas, yes, again, depends on the managers and individuals there. Otherwise, there is no reason. Of course, the Act also has made things very complicated. It has actually, and many chief wildlife wardens actually follow that. It's no longer with the chief wildlife wardens. It says that the state, you have to refer it to the state. And going into, the moment things are referred to the state, then things become very difficult. Then it's not just an individual that whom you have to contact. So that's an inherent issue with the Act, which makes things a little complicated in protected areas. But I would personally say that as far as possible, we should, at least for bird monitoring, as far as possible, if your objectives can manage that, one can avoid protected areas. There are enough forests, and perhaps that is where the monitoring is far more meaningful because of the changes occurring there. And over there, even the DFO, the local DFO can permit. Of course, there are some legal issues because of which this whole permit thing is there. It's derived from the Act. It's not coming out of the wishes of somebody. So there are rules and regulations. And I'm sure that varies from state to state. People who have worked in multiple states would feel that. At least I can tell about Uttarakhand here, things are very fast. And at least whenever I was there in the wildlife wing for a long time, things you really used to move very fast. And of course, when it comes to collections and all, things becoming a little
then it's different. It's much more complicated.
because again, some other sections of the act, they come into play. So it is actually, and I would suggest people to actually even be themselves get acquainted with these legal things, and that understanding also helps. A lot of people who are there in the conservation sector would not have even read a line of the Wildlife Protection Act. So
good point. We try not to read it as far as possible.
Yeah, it's not an interesting read anyway, but nonetheless, there are certain things that help.
Your point is very well taken. I also find that bird work outside protected areas is actually far more meaningful today, and it's easier. You can take advantage of the local community's expertise. You can answer a lot of other questions as well, and you can actually understand the landscape better because you can do more measurements more easily. So it's a good way to go about bird monitoring.
In fact, I remember when I was in the Wildlife Institute, when some of our scientists used to come for permissions, that some issue with the permission, then I used to ask him, why are you going to this PA? Your objectives can very well be achieved in the territorial forest division next doors. They don't have an answer. It's just a thing that you immediately, the moment you start thinking of working on birds or animals or anything, that you immediately think of a wildlife sanctuary or a national park. Many a times it may not be needed, and your job can become simpler.
Exactly. I was also struck in terms of logistics. I was struck by something that Priya said about linking with the local community, and I know that Umesh also works very closely with local communities, right? And I think that this is worth pointing out that with the participation of local people who actually know that system really well, who often turn out to be really good at bird identification with a bit of training, good at uploading data as well. And Uttarakhand, we have met a lot of young people who are able to contribute to eBirds that way as well. So I think it's a very good way to go. You are using local help. You don't have to fly them in from anywhere or get them to come. Your research assistants and your field partners can be from the local community. And I think particularly in historical resurveys, I think the role of locals can be really critical and, help us reach places that we may not be able to reach otherwise. So I'd like to emphasize that. We have 15 minutes left, but I'd like to give each of you, if you like, a couple of minutes to just give me one, major takeaway from this, or something that you want to tell the larger audience about historical resurveys or your thoughts on it, and then we'll go to the audience.
I would say that let's look at the past work being done, look in the literature, maybe PhD works done 20 years, 30 years ago, and try to visit those sites and dig into literature. We might find something really interesting, some quantified study. I remember in the 60s, there was somebody who estimated the densities of red jungle fowls in Rajaji National Park through, I think, spot mapping or something similar. So, I mean, these kinds of things we can find, and those can become really wonderful places for resurveys. And of course, if we are restarting things, then we have to look into future, how we are going to sustain it. And based on that, choose a methodology which you feel you can sustain. Long.
Exactly.
That's really important.
Priya?
So I would say historical resurveys can also be done in the form, they can be combined with storytelling, because they make for wonderful stories. It also allows you to access funding, which you would otherwise not, be able to avail if you were just focusing on ecology. And it actually familiarizes you with the landscape in a different way altogether. So the connect is much stronger. And of course, I would support what Dhananjai sir said, that, get your methodologies right and, find past studies that you can, resurvey. But I also feel that there has to be a story aspect to it, because that way it also reaches much more people than just the ecological community in India.
Yeah, thanks. Umesh, last word.
I'd like to just reinforce what Dhananjai sir said about the Wildlife Protection Act. I think as researchers, we all need to be familiar with the Wildlife Protection Act. It was written in 1972, and it was written at a time when wildlife populations were undergoing severe declines. So at that point in time, the Wildlife Protection Act was a very important document and a very, very strict document to avert those population declines. It still remains that document. And so forest officers are duty bound to enforce that. That is the basis of the law. And so even though the Act has not kept up with the times in terms of the evolving challenges that we have now with climate change and invasive species, I think researchers also need to realize that the Forest Department is duty bound to uphold the law as per the Wildlife Protection Act. A couple of things about local communities. I just like to know. Very often we get ideas for research from people from tribal communities. Just interacting with people and say, oh, we used to migrate from the hills to the plains or back from the plains to the hills when the oak leaves would become as big as a mouse's ear. And now the oak leaves are becoming as big as a mouse's ear about 2 weeks earlier than it used to be, 40 years ago. And so the documenting all of these changes happening with climate change, for instance. Another thing with with people who are there and know the birds there in the local languages and so on. Our field staff is entirely from the village outside Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary. And people ask me, oh, you've written this grant application, there's nothing for a JRF or an SRF. And I say, we don't need a JRF or an SRF. Everything that happens in the field is being handled by these wonderful folks. And there's no need to fly in somebody from anywhere else to do this kind of work. So I'll just, a couple of thoughts there.
Thank you, Umesh. And on that positive note, let me go across to Ram to see if there are any questions for us. Otherwise, we can keep discussing a bunch of things.
Thank you, all of you. It's been really exciting. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll postpone them so that we can take questions from the Discord. Initially, there are some general questions to all of you, and then there are some specific questions for some people. So I'll start with the general questions. First is from Monica. She asks, she says that our ministry started long-term monitoring, and I'm aware that a lot of institutions and scientists are involved in the same. However, one of the main challenges for bird monitoring is getting funds. Do you have any suggestions for researchers to help them raise funds to conduct scientific monitoring?
I'm not sure that any of us can help. We're all struggling ourselves. Yeah, would you like to take that, sir?
I think what Monica is referring to is the LTO project, which is, I think, Dr. Sukumar's. He's the lead person there, and it's quite extensive. Although whatever I could know of it, I'm not very sure how it's going to get sustained financially. It's got region-wise coordinators and taxa-wise, and it's pretty elaborate. But I'm not sure how it's going to sustain, because most of these things, as Umesh said right in the beginning, they are like 3-year project, 5-year project, and what do you do after that? Of course, you create a baseline. That's a good thing. But probably she's referring to that. I don't have too much detail about LTEO. Long-term ecological observatory. I think that's what it is. Yeah. I don't know whether Umesh knows about it.
Umesh, do you have any updates on the LTO program? Sorry,
I can add over here. LTEO is actually a co-sponsor for the bird monitoring symposium right now, and anyone can go on to the bird monitoring homepage and click. I have posted the link to Discord, and anybody can check it out. I already checked it out yesterday, but I couldn't actually see how to progress to ask for funds. So if somebody cracks that with them, please let all of us know. But I'll revert to Umesh now.
Can you hear us, Umesh? We can't hear you.
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Umesh.
I'm sorry, my network dropped in the middle.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
No, we just wanted to know if you know anything about LTEO project, because Dr. Sukumar was the main person behind it.
Yes, the LTO project is, I think, currently on hold. We've already set up, field stations and weather stations and so on at these various sites. And in most of the cases, at least for Arunachal, Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary is the location for the long-term monitoring. But as of now, like you were saying, sir, you get, the funding cycles are 3 to 5 years, and so we're just waiting for the next cycle to begin.
Okay, next question, Ram. You're muted.
You muted. Ram.
Apologies.
Start again.
Second question is also a general question. This is also from Monica. She says, after hearing Graham's talk where invasive insects might have resulted in habitat change and thereby changes in bird communities, I wonder what your views are on collecting crucial habitat variables as it adds another layer of complexity as the logistics are concerned. Or do you think, given the increasing accessibility of remotely sensed data, this can be circumvented?
I guess whatever we can do through remotely sensed data, that is better. But well, if the objectives require, then we may have to have some variables from the habitat as well. But it's definitely going to increase the challenges. Umesh, unmute yourself, please.
You're muted, Umesh.
Yeah, now it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I think he's frozen.
I think he's
I think that, the more data that can be collected on habitats, particularly on insects, looking at the way insectivorous birds are declining across ecosystems, across continents, I think it would be a very useful variable to analyze. However, I think a lot depends on funding, people, human resource, so many things. So, a lot of it, at least in my projects, everything pretty much depends on how much money we have for a particular project and how much time one can devote to all of this. Next question, Ram.
This is also a general question. Amit asks, he says, local birding guides in Uttarakhand look at revenue or monetary returns to compensate them when they are invited for surveys. Is there any other approach or strategies that we can use to help them get more involved in resurveys?
I think, Ram, I'd really like you to answer that since you're very closely bound up with this question every year.
It's a difficult question. I actually also don't have any answer. What I do know is from my experience with citizen science based birding, is that often, and this we had a discussion some months ago, is that often we think that citizens' contribution comes free and there's no cost to it. But I think that we need to, which you and Priya and Umesh have also touched upon, is that if we want local communities to be involved, we can't think of them as just a free resource. We need to invest time, we need to invest resources, and we need to also compensate them for their time. And then I think because of their access to remote landscapes and their presence in those landscapes over a longer period of time, not just come and visit and go out, because of their presence in the landscape over a longer period of time, some of the results that we'll get will be very good results. So I'm not sure if that answers the question directly, but that's all I have. But I would like some of y'all also to share your thoughts, please.
Umesh, go ahead.
I can speak about our experiences in Arunachal Pradesh, which is and Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary and that landscape itself, which is very, very heavily visited by bird watchers. And our field crew, because they know where the birds are from the research work, they do a really good job of showing people these birds. And they really know all the birds in the landscape now. So they're able to charge 5,000 rupees a day as expert bird guides. And so, when they're not working on the research project, they're actually out there guiding people and showing them birds. And they have themselves become interested in eBird. And I think our field crew has the highest number of eBird checklists from Arunachal Pradesh. And so that interest has been it's not just a job for them anymore. It's also interest in what's happening to these birds, and we should be documenting these birds. So it's and they're earning good money from being expert guides.
I'd really like to echo that. Ram and I have been working with local guides. Some of them are turning out to be amazing naturalists as well. They upload. I think Ram has encouraged them and trained them in a way that enthuses them a lot. And I think some of the guides that he's been training and our group has are some of the highest contributors to iNaturalist and eBird now. So I think it's a really fantastic way to go. And I think everyone should think about this. In future also, if you want to revisit the landscapes, there's no way you will be able to do it. It'll become 10 times easier if you have local recruits and local partners in the field project.
Yeah, actually, that takes me to a point that we have to utilize this resource, but at the same time, like right now, many of them, as you said, I can say about much of Uttarakhand, a lot of bird guides are posting in eBird and giving a lot of wonderful information. Can we think of something, akin to eBird, which can be a better monitoring tool, which these people could integrate with eBird, so that we get both the typical eBird recording as well as some slightly better quality data without any additional effort, really, with tweaking of things a little bit, because you can't expect them to leave their job and do point counts or something like that. They will continue to do, but somehow get slightly more useful monitoring data from them than just eBird. So I think if we can come up with something like that, we could create these monitoring individuals scattered over a large landscape and which kept sustained for a long time on its own.
Yeah. You're muted, Ram. Can you?
Sorry, I have two more questions. Though this may have already been answered. This is addressed to Dhananjai sir. I would like to know how forest officers generally perceive resurveys and follow-up expeditions. With a related question, can you provide some guidelines on how one should approach forest officers to conduct such surveys?
First thing, well, the forest officers, well, there are now gradually that number is increasing who are looking at birds or understanding birds better, but by and large this whole idea about resurveys and all, I think it's much behind in their priority. If you talk to them, they might find it interesting, but it doesn't come into the regular scheme of things. And second thing you said, approach the how to approach the forest officers. I think now more and more number of field officers want people to come birdwatch in their areas, produce lists. I know of a lot of colleagues who keep contacting me that we have done this, we have produced a nice booklet of birds in my forest division or my sanctuary in some remote parts. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. If you approach them and tell them that these are things which will be useful to you, because in many places we don't even have the basic checklisting, what to talk of quantified information. So I think many of them can be very helpful. And I know that many states are doing bird festivals now. That is actually a sign of the interest being shown by the forest department in general towards birds. So I think one has to make use of this. Everybody may not be like that, but a large share of the colleagues in forest service would actually be quite positive. You to just go and tell them straight. Don't talk hardcore science that I want to just do this. Give them something that will be useful to do them as well. You can always tell them that I'll have some checklist made of some nice posters for birds and all those things. Maybe that can help. And I'm sure you'll invariably get a very positive response and support.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we are almost at the end, and maybe some final words from each of you. Then we'll close this session.
Okay. All I would say is that historical resurveys are great, But if we lack historical information, we have to begin now. And it's high time we have a simple monitoring protocol at a large number of places in India. And as I said earlier, not just in good quality, undisturbed forest, practically everywhere we need them. That's all. Thank you.
Priya?
So I've said this before already, but I'll start by saying thank you, Ram, for organizing this. And, having heard the talks today, I feel we can take one of the two paths, which is either, you focus on ecology and have a strong ecological question and, have your data collected in such a way that people in the future can go about doing resurveys in the same landscape. With a simplistic framework, like Dhananjai sir said, or you could have, a resurvey of the kind, we are doing, where you're just putting baseline information together again after a period of over 100 years. And like I said before, I feel like resurveys make for great opportunities to tie up with stories. So I think storytelling would be an important aspect of this. So we really should consider that, just so that your work reaches larger number of people. Thank you.
Umesh?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank Bird Monitoring India, Ram and Ghazala for bringing this together. Thank you so much. Again, one of the things that I think of is that the landscape of conservation and the landscape of conservation threats has changed drastically in the last couple of decades. We're now not dealing with protectionism per se. We're dealing with a number of threats that go well beyond the protected area framework. We're dealing with threats like climate change. We're dealing with threats like the spread of invasive species. And I think our bird monitoring as well has to recognize that these are the threats that we are dealing with and monitor and resurvey in such a way that these threats are explicitly incorporated in the framework for monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank everyone. It's really come together well. And especially Ram and Monica and everybody else connected with IBM. Thank you so much for doing this. I think together we've raised some really important points. And we've managed to get an IFS officer in captive conversation. So
don't say managed to get. I was very happy to join this.
So I just want to end with a few words that I think should be on top of all of our lists: persistence, patience, and resilience. And I think that they hold true for birds also. They're qualities of birds, and I think that all of us need to adopt this in order to do research in India, particularly in bird monitoring. So good science, local participation, persistence is my final piece of wisdom to the group. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ram, and thank you, Ghazala, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all the panelists. It was a really great discussion, and I hope a lot of people have taken a lot of notes and will do some follow-up action. I just want to end with some future schedule. Please go over to the poster sessions, which is already online on Discord from 3:15. The poster makers and the poster presenters will be available for online discussion. After that, we'll have a short break immediately now. 3:15 we'll be back for the poster session. And at 4:15, we will have the keynote address by Dr. Camila Gomez, who will be talking about resurveys from Colombia. So I hope all of you all can join us for that. And once again, thank you to the team for organizing this and to all the panelists.